Okay, I think we'll get started. Good day, everyone. My name is Oscar Nespoli, and welcome to our recurring series of webinars on design practice, both given by researchers and practitioners. And today we have a very special guest, and we also have a host moderator. I'd like to thank you for participating, and I'd like you to also be aware that this is hosted by the Design Society. I'd like to pass it over to our guest moderator, Kush Buber from the University of New Brunswick, to introduce our guest. Kush, take it away.
Thanks, Oscar. So as Oscar mentioned, my name is Kush Buber. I'm an assistant professor at the Dr. J. Herbert Smith Center for Technology Management and Entrepreneurship at the University of New Brunswick, and I'll be moderating our fireside practitioner discussion today. The outline of our session today will be about a 20 to 30 minute roughly presentation by our speaker, followed by a 15 to 20 minute question and answer period. We'll facilitate today's discussion. We'll be using the Q&A chat feature located at the bottom right corner of the WebEx panel for participants to ask questions to our speaker. So in general, if you can think of some good questions, please feel free to type and send those to the moderators. I want to thank, as Oscar did, I want to thank the Design Society members and the external participants for attending today's session. Most of you are aware, I believe, that this talk is brought to you by the Design Practice Special Interest Group within the Design Society, for which our mission statement is to foster interaction between academics and practitioners to capture, understand, develop, improve, support, exchange, and share design practice. In the spirit of our mission, today we have a special guest, a professional design practitioner, Mr. John Walmsley from Starfish Medical, who resides in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. John is the Executive Vice President of Strategic Relations at Starfish Medical, whom are a leading provider of medical device design services. John is a professional physicist who holds a master's degree in optics from Queen's University Belfast in Northern Ireland. John has held multiple roles at Starfish Medical, which include the Chief Operating Officer, whom was responsible for product development, manufacturing, quality assurance, finance, and HR, to name a few. Quick anecdote, John and I met while I was pursuing my PhD at the University of Victoria, and I think we connected pretty much immediately. And it's kind of funny because I think we're both extroverted physicists who happen to be product designers in the biomedical design space, and I think that's pretty much a 1 in a million, interaction. So, as for today, John's talk will focus on building value for medical device companies by retiring risk. So, John, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kush, and thanks, Oscar, and thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for everybody. I'll wish you a very good morning, knowing very well that for some of you this is a Friday evening. So thanks for joining. I've been asked to give this talk as part of this ongoing exchange between design academics and practitioners and the wider community. And I hope it helps. I'll be making a lot of assumptions about where everybody is in the design world, and I'm primarily starting with trying to put Starfish approach in that context. And then I'm going to have a bit of a thesis that our approach is by no means unique and is probably fairly representative of a well-honed product development, design and development process. Also, I should say as well, I'd be very interested in any subsequent follow-up that might come from this. So Kush already was good enough to say, push different buttons to make this move on. The next slide, there we are. So that's what I just said. So I'm going to give you an introduction. I'll talk to you about this value and risk journey that we take we travel on with our clients. I'll pause there, depending on timing, for some questions. And if there are, we run out of questions, I'm happy to just share some aha moments of our own and some examples, and then have some other questions and discussion at the end. So Kush said who I am. So this is where I started. First half of my career is telecom, fiber optics. And then the second half has been with Starfish. What I like to do, as you can see the numbers of people in the business units in which I worked, I like to be part of growing teams, help grow them, help be ambitious. I'm motivated by shipping products that people will actually use. I started as an R&D engineer, new product introduction, product engineering, then project management, VP of product development here, COO, and now I'm responsible for the long-term success of our clients and helping grow Starfish more strategically. Starfish is you're going to now see a few slides that we show to clients. I think it helps orient who we are. So these are examples of the sorts of things that we do. We're a product and technology resource for our clients. Where we're primarily focused is complex electromechanical systems with some measure of software control. We're medical devices, which is they're regulated Class 2 medical devices. That is devices that make some sort of a health-related claim, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. They're different from something that makes a claim around just general wellness. They're making some regulated claim. We've set ourselves up as an engineering team to provide a big part of a solution for entrepreneurial startup companies who want to grow the commercial side of their business, don't want to acquire a world-class design team, use them to develop the product and then move on, leave them, and then work with a sustaining team. Instead, they tend to work with us, and it helps them grow. But that fits very well for new products that are coming out of large corporate clients as well. And another important thing to say is, as we really like to own a major part of the product development. Some aspect of the design is something that we own, and we're set up with serious program management capabilities so that we can do that responsibly. Broadly, these are our capabilities. The human factors, industrial design, mechanical design, electronics, optics, electro-optics. We also have ultrasound, computing and firmware from very low-level microprocessors all the way up to a system on a chip. Computing, and then subsequently out to the cloud with the systems. We also have a bioservices group, which includes microfluidics. And our offering is that this whole team is very used to working together. And there's a lot of synergies that come with that, and the trade-offs that happen in a very organic and fair way. If the mechanical designer needs a little bit more space, or more likely the electronics person needs a little bit more space, then the mechanical designer, industrial designers can work to achieve that while not losing sight of what the eventual product has to be. So an integrated team. We span North America. North America is our market. We don't do much business outside of North America. We find it's a plenty large enough market to work in. We have 2 locations. We were founded here in Victoria, British Columbia, where I'm standing. We also have an office there for about 3 years in Toronto, Ontario. About 140 staff members, of which between 80 and 90 are design engineers. 20 years developing medical devices. I think maybe it's very shortly will be 21. 80% of our customers are in the US, 20% are in Canada, and that kind of reflects the size of the market. We work really hard to maintain a good culture that enables creative design to happen and be effective. And we have a rigorous quality system that is FDA registered and is ISO 1345 certified. ISO 1345 is the ISO 9000 for medical devices. If you're used to ISO 9000, you'd recognize it very well. And so I guess it's worth pausing just to say we did spend a lot of time to make sure that our quality system is something that we can actually use and that lets us do the design and development that we need to do and doesn't hidebound us at the wrong times nor fail to capture the important stuff at the right times. And then this is a slide I just made up, and so you can tell me if it's useful or not, or if it even feels true. But I think it's what I'm trying to articulate here is that I'm not quite sure of the audience and where all of you operate. Medical devices for us, we do things as complex as dialysis machines. If you see the gold underlined pieces there are medical devices that we've designed and developed. So we do things as critical and as complex as dialysis machines, ultrasound systems. There's a very complex ingestible pill there. We also have done novel syringes, cannula, and we have apps in the App Store. And that's kind of the range of what we do. They tend to be of, I'm saying, medium volume, medium complexity. If it's the bottom left there shows a surgical tool, a custom surgical tool that will be sold to a surgeon plus 15 of their best friends, and that's not our world. Top right, the Apple Watch does hedge on making some medical claims, and we have not worked on the Apple Watch yet. It's conceivable that someone would ask us to crack a core problem in the middle of the algorithms of that product, but they would not give us responsibility for the whole product. For people operating in automotive, aerospace, we are nowhere near the complexity that's required in that system. And similarly, people working on Kinder toys and kettles, generally what we work on requires more than one engineer or one designer to hold the entire quality functional deployment in their head. And so we have some systems that let us deploy, take the requirements to a risk, to specifications, to verification, to validation, but they're not we don't spend as much time as someone trying to launch a new Airbus or Tesla. The other two devices that you see there that are sit within those purple boxes, one's a massager and one's a general wellness device providing some therapy. If they make medical claims, we'd be very happy to work on them. If they're really just looking to get something out that delivers some energy to people and they want to say it makes you feel better, generally they find us a little bit hidebound by rules. In fact, even the kettle, if someone had a kettle that they wanted to make a regulatory claim about, we'd be very happy to do that. But usually for something like that, a consumer device, it's much more efficient and effective to go to a designer who just does it. Also showing there in the middle on the right is a pacemaker. And so being responsible for all of the traceability and critical supply chain control that happens in something that's a class 3 medical device implanted is not something that we're excited to do, but we do help with significant subcomponents of that on the design side. Okay, so that's Starfish. So then what I was going to talk about a little bit was trying to get to the title of the talk. And to start with, I just do some norming. I think if we're all designers here, this should be all how we think, I think. So the knowledge funnel, it starts from mystery. Oh, this thing happens. Wow, weird. And then eventually a rule of thumb. So this thing happens usually when I do this. And then an algorithm, if I set X and Y in the right place, then Z and Z automatically follow. And that's what the design process is intended to take a new concept, a new product through that cycle. Starfish tends to typically come in sort of near the end of that mystery phase. Usually the client is pretty confident they're into the heuristic, if not the algorithmic stage, but usually there's some residual mystery that we need to help remove. Then I like this quote from Jeff Bezos. So we enter this challenge open-eyed, but the degree of difficulty, hard as it might be, meeting whatever clearly articulated need we have would be worth the effort. Success is going to require talented experts, a beginner's mind, and a long-term orientation. So that's I think that's design, and that's where Starfish tends to live. Just pause a moment to have a little word from our sponsor. So I don't know if you watch this show, Silicon Valley. So Richard Hendricks in the green sweater, CEO, and it's an interesting show. None of the key plot points are about the technology. It always just works. There's lots of interesting business challenge, but if you can, and he's of course a little bit more comedic, and that's why I was happy putting his photograph up here rather than any of our other CEOs that we work with as startups, because I think what I'm going to describe is a little bit simplistic, and I wouldn't want to ascribe it to any individual, but I'm happy to ascribe it to him. So what does he think when he's about to launch a product? And really what he's thinking in terms of usually is company value. So he's going to build a company and it has some value today. And usually if you can get a bunch of people together with a good idea and not much else, you're worth $10 million. If you take that forward, you start accumulating investors and you make promises about that certain milestones will be met and additional funding will be achieved. And as you achieve those milestones, the value of your company goes up, and it just goes up like this. Is how a CEO will, the average CEO will think, or so what? Of course, in practicality, it steps up at those points rather than following this curve, but it's generally what they're thinking. And in fact, the same is true for a product manager within a corporate environment. They're thinking, we start with this value, and let's just move it through the process, and it will come at the end, and the sales, value to the company, and value to my career will follow this curve, and all will be good. Some of you may have experienced this more likely path, which is where it starts, and we run into an issue. It's going well, we're making progress, and then, this problem's taking a little bit longer to solve than we thought, but we're making lots of progress on other stuff, and then suddenly the issue turns into be bigger than was thought, and clearly there's some issue, and the company maybe isn't worth as much as everybody thought, and the value drops. But it's okay, the team pulls it together, fixes the problem, the CEO tells the story, the value climbs again, but then there's another issue and it drops again, and then eventually it limps into market, and there's maybe some revenue, but the whole exercise was so much more underwhelming than was initially expected. So I guess there's another alternative vision, which is oftentimes or sometimes, if the technology in the company is lucky, it looks like this, which having proven the concept, had proven the concepts they thought, had big problems with the first system, seeding the market, ran into some other issues, get through them, it's all good now, and regulatory clearance comes, the launch is great, and the company all takes off in value, and that's good news. But what usually happens is that second growth phase is under different ownership, and so the CEO does not get to see those good days. The product manager doesn't get to be responsible for that great success. It's all very dissatisfying all around. And so what that looks like from that was the value growth. What that looks like from risk retirement, because as Starfish, we want our clients, their investors, and the product to be a big success in the market. We want that to go as smoothly as possible, recognizing that there's a lot of stuff that we don't know. So we have this thing, the uncertainty in the project, and there are many different kinds of uncertainty, and the one that as product designers we focus on is the known uncertainty, things we know we don't know, and so typically that same CEO and their team will recognize that this is the curve they're going to follow. The things they don't know, they start working on them, and problems get solved. And in the early de-risk and defining phase, they solve a bunch of problems, they discover some other problems, but generally it all moves forward. They get through the detailed design and tests, they harden the product, they do their verification and validation, and then at that point there's just some process risk, and then finally, I haven't drawn it on here, when you go to market, everyone will like the product because of course it's so great. What typically happens, and tell yourselves if you've ever experienced this, is that actually the team made great progress. All sorts of things get done. The form is looking good, the color is matched, the supply chain and the cost of parts are coming together, the power supply has been sourced and procured, and well, we're not quite getting the signal quality that we hoped, but we're working on it, and it's nearly done. So the risk, the apparent, the known uncertainties just drop away, and it's making great progress. We're well ahead of schedule. But at some time during the detailed design and test, as you're putting the whole system together for the first time, and the signal still isn't quite as good, there comes this dawning realization that one of the pieces of electronics in the supply chain just isn't sufficient, or the algorithm, you really don't understand what's happening within the algorithm, or that the use case is different than was expected. Suddenly some huge crisis erupts and goes rocketing up in terms of discovering all of these uncertainties that just weren't known before. And if you've lived through this, or I'm sure you have, it's a very exciting time. Everybody's interested in what you're doing. The senior management swings by, there are weekly meetings, daily meetings. Suppliers are responding quickly, and everyone's yelling, and it's oh so exciting. And then finally you crack the problem, and you start coming back down the uncertainty. And of course, as you took a good hard look at the core technology, you discovered there was a lot of other things you didn't really know about. But making progress on those until it happens again. And then just for the sake of pragmatism, usually it's only two massive big humps if the thing's not going to die, and eventually you push the product into manufacturing and into the marketplace with a bunch of residual unknowns, but it should be okay. And mostly those unknowns can be fixed in the field, where of course it's somewhere between 100 and 1,000 times more expensive to fix them. And you're doing it in front of your customers, who of course are not always the most tolerant or interested in your troubles. So much better way of doing that, and that's kind of the description of the problem. Much better way of doing that is to deliberately seek out other uncertainties, the unknown unknowns, find out what they are. And so Starfish spends, and other people spend significant amount of time in the early stages de-risking and defining the product. And so this is a methodical look at where are the issues that could arise, and I'll show you where a representation of where Starfish looks to find those issues, but really digging them out and acknowledging them and saying, yes, I know it feels like we're moving backwards, but actually these are important pieces that we're getting an understanding of the scale of the problem and how much effort it will take to resolve it. And at some point within the scope of the discovery, we reach a peak. I guess it'd be an interesting little moment to pause and say, this stage of it appeals to me as a physicist. Someone once said that science is a way of turning dollars into knowledge, and engineering is a way of turning knowledge into dollars. And so another thing I sometimes say is, if you're a scientist and you start your career with a crappy little problem that no one's interested in, and you work on it for an entire career, and if you're the most successful ever, by the end of your career, you'll have an institute of 1,000 people all working on different aspects of that problem, learning more about it, and sharing that knowledge with society. If you're an engineer, on the other hand, you want to understand the problem just well enough so that then you can pick an arbitrary solution that resolves all of the constraints and implement that. So that's what we're doing here. So we're exploring to understand what are the necessary, within the known constraints, the necessary constraints of the user, the technology, the regulatory environment, the costs of the product, the reliability. What issues are there? And so we uncover all of those issues, and we start working on them and being satisfied that we understand what it's going to take to solve them. And then push down, we do a detailed design and test, where you build this all into one system, demonstrate that it works, do some testing, drop the risk, continue hardening the product. So you bring in your final vendors. You may not be using final vendors for the first initial prototypes. Bring in your final vendors, build the whole system, have production techs to build it, do the verification, testing against specifications, do validation, testing against the user requirements, and then do a new product introduction into manufacturing, and then release into manufacturing and scale up. And at each of those points, like under this curve, it's not the same uncertainty that's just getting completely eroded. There are new discoveries at each moment, but they're of a much smaller scale, and the big uncertainties that were identified earlier are being resolved with intention, so that generally we can drive the known uncertainty down in this way, we can drive the risk down in this way, and then correspondingly we can drive the value for our customers up. So this is good practice, and there's one small piece left that's very important that enables this to be scalable, and that's putting in some gates. And so base gates is it's a very well-known process, but this is the key of it. What that process I described, experienced engineers, good experienced engineers and designers have learned that what I just described is the way you do design and development. But if you're building a large organization of 140 plus with 80 plus engineers, not all of them, they're all good, but they're not all experienced, and they haven't all learned the lessons. And one of the ways that we look to build our systems and to build Starfish systems so that we can be effective for our customers is to put them into gates. And so these are the key moments for us when we hold those gate reviews. Gate review is a design review where we sit, the design team sit in a room, the product management, product development management at Starfish sits in the room, the client sits in the room, and then some experts from outside the team sit there and review the design. And to make sure it's not quite as ad hoc as design reviews often can be. Oftentimes a design review will be the attendees I just described will be there, and then each of the experts will ask their 3 canned questions that they always ask, and then things will move on. For Starfish, we're working in such a diverse range of technologies and products that we can't assume that we know anything about the product each time, and therefore we make a point of being explicit in our gates with a checklist, and our checklist shows at each of these points. So the first one, the big question at that gate is, actually, you know what? I will jump on to the next slide, and then I'll talk about what the big question at the gates are. So for what I'm describing is, and what I'm saying is, you need to know what phase you're in of the development. You need to behave appropriately. And so this is what Starfish does, and many practitioners. So the phase 0, as Starfish calls it, is that initial proof of concept. And one of the questions when someone says, I'm building this proof of concept system, the big question you have to ask them is, what concept are you proving? Because quite often they really mean they're just getting on and proving the system and working on what they know how to do. They're not really tackling the thing that they don't know how to do. So what concept are you proving? So we have a couple of swim lanes. One is product development, which is really understanding how the whole product is. So it starts with contextual research. What are other products and what's the use environment? Creating some concepts around it, and then proving any residual uncertainties in those concepts. Usability is a big part. It's a little easy for us because usability is a regulatory requirement, but we were doing it before that was the case. And this is site visits with interviews, and then end user concepts and formative studies to understand how people use it. A surgeon will tell you how a product is used in their operating room, and if you go and watch a nurse use it, it's very, very rare that it's exactly how the surgeon said. Technology development, there's some core technology, and this is that algorithm I mentioned earlier. It's a force that needs to be applied. It's flow that needs to be metered. There's some core technology that needs to be embodied in the device, and have we really cracked that problem? Does it really work? Quality management, we're starting to build our design inputs. So for us, that's requirements, specification, architecture, risk analysis. And then regulatory support. Each of these devices to get to market has to run the gauntlet of the regulatory authorities, and you can wait till the end to find out what they think of your idea. It's much better to start early on. And then manufacturing, mostly in this phase, the only manufacturing questions are we going to be doing something completely novel that's never been done before? And if so, we should understand what the constraints of that approach are. So we have a gate at the end of that proof of concept, and we ask the questions: do we know what the user needs from this product? Does the technology actually work? Do we see a path to it costing what it needs to cost? Do we see a path for the regulatory clearance in the end? And we also choose to make sure, have we completed the design input documentation adequately? And if at this point everybody in the room can all agree that if we design and develop this product, then it will be we will have a success. Based on what we know today, then we will have a success. The gate gets signed, and then we move into building an alpha prototype, is what Starfish calls it. And so this alpha prototype is the first determined attempt to build the whole product, and we build the whole thing. Don't cut any corners, except in so far as maybe we don't commit to expensive injection molding. We'll use some 3D printing technologies, and oftentimes the assembly processes are a little less robust than they are later on. But really what we want to do is be confident that we can make the whole product, and we've discovered all the issues that are happening. And so continued user feedback during that time, technical design, and retiring the issues and refining what we have. The design history file is a document, is the binder, is what it's called in the medical device industry. And continue with the regulatory strategy of setting up for clinical testing and beginning to engage with manufacturing partners. Then there's a verification, a testing. We take that product and we test it, and so we want to know. We don't expect to pass the full specification, and we don't expect the users to love absolutely everything about it, but we want to know what's remaining to be addressed during that beta hardening process. And if we discover something major, we may loop back through the alpha and do an alpha 2 or maybe an alpha 3 before we clear our next gate, which is, yep, we have a design and a bill of materials, and we know what this product is. Plus, we have an outstanding list of issues to be addressed, and they are all doable. We know what to do. It's just a matter of doing them. And in that case, we're happy to move into beta, where we refine. We move. A big transition for our customers typically at this point is investment in injection molded tooling, some larger quantities, maybe bringing on some different vendors, hardening the design for final freeze at the end of the beta. The technology maybe keeps getting better, and we're maintaining the documentation, and we're starting to develop processes for the assembly. And then finally we do a freeze. Some people put a gate at this point. We don't. There's a freeze of the design, and then it goes through the final formal verification and validation, which can include clinical testing. And at the end of that, there's an approved design, which if it changes, has to be changed under control, engineering change control, and if there are issues that would affect the previous verification and validation, then that testing needs to be repeated. So we want to be pretty firmly finished before we go into that verification and validation process. At the end of the beta is a gate which says, yep, we are all done. Let us, and the key thing here is let us make our submission to the regulatory authorities. This would be FDA primarily for CE mark, in Europe, Health Canada in Canada, and various regulatory bodies in China now. And the transfer, introduction to manufacturing, making sure that we don't, we're maintaining the design, we're not losing key elements of the design during this time. There's some engineer somewhere doesn't think it would be a lot easier if we just made this change, and forgetting the reason why the original design came through that way. And then manufacturing happens as and usually it's a phase. There's an initial scale-up. Volumes are never quite what are expected, and there's a lot of learning from customers and users, and then the device just becomes more and more stable as it moves forward. So that's how we do gates at Starfish and the different ways in which we're behaving. And it's worth noting that different people come to the fore in different phases. So a very creative designer who has a trouble writing stuff down can be a great is the magic of that early phase 0, and someone who just loves to write down everything they do and to have a reason for every step from step A to step B is ideal for that hardening beta phase. And then the alpha phase has a kind of a mix. So just to give you a little bit of an example from a long time ago, on the phase 0 here, we have, top left there, you see we did a bit of optics modeling. This was a device for treating toenail fungus. It's a light-based therapy, so we wanted to be sure that we could get the intensity of light that was required. We came up with some hard to read there. The bluey shady thing is a usability study. The ergonomics study shape of patients just from design books. Then we built something that looked ugly, didn't look like the final device, but it delivered the therapy, and that was great. And then a rendering that of what the whole product looks like. And so then the gate looks at all of this information. It says, seems to me like we have something that we can execute on, and people will buy, and if we believe it will work clinically. We stepped into phase 1. The top 2/3 of this box are the alpha. Made first units out of their their molded, silicone molded 3D printed parts. And then the bottom is reaction injection molding. That one, the one that shows black, is unpainted, but that's the more finished and polished device. And then start transferring, so drawings with tolerances, vendors, first article inspections, work instructions, training, all of that happens, and then phase 3 of manufacturing, just making lots of the same thing and shipping it. Because I'm going to pause there, and any questions? So here's what we're up against. It's all design professionals together. Starfish started as working with entrepreneurial startups. So we never see this from our corporate clients, but and to be honest, we never really see this from our startup clients either. We don't see it from our corporate or our startup clients, but it just kind of struck me as this is the opposite, right? So this is the consumer model where, hey, let's put an LED clock, some sensors to measure temperature and pulse, put them in a box, get a buddy to cut our own open, slot it in, stitch it up. And then look at that, we've got a minimally viable product. Who else would want one? You want one? I can get you one. There's just go to Kickstarter. We don't need all this process. And so he had a processor there with data storage, Bluetooth comms to a smartphone, inductive charging, and it's a different side of his arm, but I'm assuming that it healed fairly well, and it's all looking good. And if you look at the dates on here, October to this is just a story that was around at the time. So October to January, it's all looking good. Sometime during late January, early February, he noticed his arm was swelling a little bit more than it had been. And wisely, he took the device out and discovered that the battery had been swelling and was about to explode. So that's not how we do medical devices. That's not how we do design. But it's I just always think it's an entertaining story. But here's a little aha moment we had. So we talked to a client who was all about. He's a doctor. He was looking at neurological conditions, looking to diagnose them, and his way of diagnosing them was to perceive their ability to perceive frequency of flashing lights gave some indication of what was happening with their nervous system. That all makes sense. And so he had a mock-up, and he came to us and he said, "I'd like you to make me this product, and as part of it, let's talk about the design." And he was very, very emphatic that he needed to have the flashing lights on one side, and he needed to have the display on the other side that gave him the diagnostic frequency so he could read it. And then he could sit opposite his patient, he could flash this at them and see the numbers, and they would tell him what they could see, what they couldn't see, and then he'd write down the results. And so we were we pushed on that assumption a fair bit, but no, he was emphatic that was quite what he did. So we asked, so we came up with, and these are rendered concepts of what it could look like. And we made, I think we went as far as including an LED, a flashing LED that could change its frequency in some box, but it didn't have any of it wasn't a refined model at all. It was a total maquette of the final product. And we went to see him in Utah, and we went to see him, and we took the device, and he and his patient all agreed. A couple of patients agreed that he could sit down with the patient and use the device and just see how it felt. And so as we're standing there, like a good doctor, he went in and the patient sat down, and the doctor went over to sit beside them. And of course they did, because that's I think a humane and way of being a doctor, to be in the experience with your patient. But the entire design was ridiculous based on that that one observation. And so we were able to move ahead and make up something that was, was agnostic to orientation. And he was much happier and much more successful out of that. And this is small, this happens all the time as an example of things that where we ask the practitioner what they do, and then and anybody who works with users knows you ask a user what they do and they tell you what they think they do or what they should do. If you go and watch them, they never do it. They always do something. If they give you a list of things they do, always one of those things they do the opposite of what they told you. And they'll always have a rationalization and a justification if you point it out, but the fact is, unless they're doing it to accommodate some deficiency in the existing design, then it's something that we need to accommodate in the design. And so that was, this is an easy to tell example of the same thing, but we've seen the same thing observing multiple surgeries lots and lots of times. Another area where we got involved is that, and this is a different space. This is more reduction to practice, the design for manufacture. We came to a client came to us, and they had a system that worked well. It was an optics-based system that's used for measuring perfusion in the blood. So it was typically or often used for plastic surgery, for therapeutic plastic surgery, where that is where someone had been injured and some tissue was removed one part of their body and was placed on skin was placed over a burn, for instance, on another part of their body. And the surgeon would carefully connect the capillaries of this skin to make sure that it was getting enough blood so that it would live well. If they, and of course, there's a lot of capillaries, and you want to be sure you've connected enough of them and you've oriented it well, and then it's getting good blood flow. And so typically the surgeon, once they've done it, will palpate it as they push it, and you can do it yourself. You push your skin and it goes white, and then it goes red afterwards, or pink again, or depending on the color of your skin. That's what happens in my hand. You'll get a different, and that was all they had. And so what this does is this, they inject a dye into the body, which fluoresces under this imaging system, and so then the surgeon can be confident that each piece of the attached tissue has well perfused, is getting lots of blood. And what that means is that it's not going to die while it's sitting on the patient. No patient wants to go home, having gone through all of that, then have the bit of skin that was attached to their arm die on their arm and have to have the procedure again. So big value, but it was in a they'd agreed a large distribution contract, and they were going on a pay-per-use model with a very, very low cost distribution of systems. And as part of that, they needed to distribute a significant number of these really fast. And the current system, while it worked, it didn't fit with the workload or use of the surgeons or the surgery, the operating room at all. So they came to us, and we made the sketch on the left there. You can see it's a very early preliminary quick sketch of, hey, would you like something that looks like this? And that was based on just our general knowledge and experience on the operating room. And one of the key things is a easy to access grab bar, because they get pushed around in the OR very, very easily and without a lot of care, and they'll pull on what's ever closest, and so you want to make sure that whatever's closest is the grab bar. So they said, excellent, can you do that? Can you do that in less than 6 months? And so, okay, it's going to be hard, and you're going to need a lot of your attention, and it's going to be very expensive. And they were fine with that. And so it was very hard, very fraught, required a lot of their attention. It was very expensive, but we started shipping systems on the right there within the 6 months from that very first sketch, and ultimately ended up shipping hundreds of them. And one of the ways in which we went through got it done so quickly is we skipped that beta hardening phase, and we went with as good as we had, and everyone's expectations were set and everybody understood, and it didn't make it more difficult with issues in the field or with the manufacturing. But an example of the sort of things that come up during a considered hardening exercise was that so that the body here initially was made again of those cast urethane housings. They met all of the flammability and biocompatibility requirements, but they weren't very structurally predictable, and they tended to move a bit. So a lot of work was required to get them to go together. In that lovely grab bar, we had discovered a CNC bar bending solution, and we recognized that by putting a bar all the way around, it was a little bit over constrained, but a combination of the housings, the variability in the urethane, and the variability in the bars just really caused a lot of angst. Not least when the units came back for service and had to be reopened, and the people who had signed up to build them in the first place weren't the ones reassembling them. It was somebody who was trying to get through a service issue. Found the whole thing very, very frustrating. And so it was a straightforward fix. Go through that beta phase, split the bar into sections, and then the housings were changed to injection molding. Even if this is a 6 foot tall thing, so they're pretty big pieces. But that was a big learning. Well, it wasn't a learning. That was a big illustration of something we already knew, and we were able to predict for the client, and the client was willing to take on, and it worked to their advantage in the end. They managed to get their $1 billion exit at the end, so they were happy. And this device is in use today, and the next generation is out and having a benefit for patients in many, many areas. Another example, just as a worked example, this is a company, Integrated Surgical. What they wanted to do was to do suction during surgery. Surgeons don't use, for most of their work, surgeons aren't working with scalpels. They're using a thing called electrosurgical pencil that creates a plasma on the end and cuts and cauterizes at the same time. But the disadvantage of that is it makes smoke. And so they would like to extract the smoke, but it's also making, seeping into the wound is also liquid. And if you've watched movies, you'll have the surgeon ask for more suction, and because they're sucking out the blood so they can actually see what they're doing. So suction of blood is not easy to do at the same time as suction of smoke. And there's a big deal with the smoke because a lot of cancer surgeons in particular suffer from throat cancer dealing with this, particularized cancer. And so big value here, and there was a clever breakthrough that we brought to the game that enabled the device to provide a lot more suction and actually to operate as a fluid suction and smoke suction device at the same time. So we went through this. We established that there was a reimbursement path. I won't dig into medical reimbursement, but it's not as simple as selling something to someone. The consumable capital cost structure was well understood. And of course, there's a motivation, surgeons experiencing this elevated risk of throat cancer. You can kind of see that that the surgeon mentality is they're still willing to do the work even with that. They'll take that risk on for their patient. There's a bunch of the regulatory authorities will tell you all about how to do. They have guidelines of things they've seen before and they don't want to see again. So guidance on powered suction pumps, also for just what colors you need to make all of your input lines. If you're always operating in the same industry, these things just become known within your domain experts. But if you're operating as Starfish does across many different areas of practice, it's important to go search and understand what the guidances are each time, and because you don't want to not comply with them, because you'll be right back to the starting point for no good reason at all. Did some bunch of modeling about what suction was capable and possible, and showed that we thought we would get the suction that we needed. And then we did a demonstration. We turned on the device on the left was smoking vertically, and then we turn on the suction, and then it pulls it straight across. So we proved that the technology worked. So next up, after this slide, in the world of medical devices, and we're very used to seeing tissue and surgery and stuff. So if you don't want to see it, I'm just going to show one slide, which is actually of a carcass from a butcher. But if you don't want to see it, you don't have to. I'll tell you when it's over. And so what we did is we needed to test it. So we set ourselves up an operating room with all of the constraints of an operating room. We brought in this carcass from the butchers. The surgeon here is from Stanford. There she is operating as she would, cauterizing, using her electrosurgical pencil on the system before, and you can see the smoke that's coming off, and that's normal. That's the way it goes. And she's getting she's getting suction of the fluid so that she can see what's happening in the operating site, but there's smoke everywhere. And turn the device on, and smoke's gone, and it's making still making the same amount of smoke, and you can sort of see it in the tube there. But the smoke and the fluid are being extracted at the same time. So, and as she used it, I think initial concepts she used were didn't fit her hand, so there was some tuning to do. But as at this point, this was still a formative study, but for us, this was really very definitive that this is a good product and will work well, and ready to get into a few other surgeons' hands. So turned into this product as part of this system, and making the lives of surgeons better, their surgeries better, surgeries even better, and keeping them healthy themselves. I really am. But questions and discussion.
Okay, I'm still alive, just coming back online. Thank you, John, for that talk. I really appreciate it. Really interesting, and I really see the significant diversity of the work that you do at Starfish is quite remarkable in the context of biomedical design. I even saw a SciEx device.
That's right.
Yeah. Was it a Q-trap or a Q-TOF? I think it was.
So the mass spectrometry system, yeah, exactly. And so that was. So we mostly medical devices do a little. So for those of you who don't know, that's an instrument for it's mass spectrometer, so lab-based instrument. And so we do edge into that world a little because it uses a lot of the same technologies. Typical path for a really interesting and ambitious medical device is it starts with a lab-based tool, and then the idea is how do we make this smaller and more reliable and more predictable and less flexible, so that it's targeted on a use case in the patient clinical world. And so we do like to keep aware of what's happening in the world of lab instrumentation.
Thanks. Yeah, just for context, I was a biomedical design engineer for SciEx, so that's interesting. So yet we're now at the Q&A stage of the session. So I encourage any of our participants to please enter a question you may have in the Q&A panel in the bottom right corner of the WebEx panel, and then we will review and give you the opportunity to ask your question yourself. In the meantime, I actually have a question, if you don't mind, John. And this is something that came up as you were speaking that piqued my curiosity. And so ultimately, the question I have is interesting because you talk about driving uncertainty and risk down. And I believe they're certainly related. And you made me go back into my anxious moments when I was working in industry in the same space, being under situations where I thought we have this nailed, and then something comes up, and you're back to
we've all lived this life, and I'm not saying it doesn't sometimes feel like that, but the intentional approach is so much better.
So the question I have here is so being able to drive uncertainty and risk down fundamentally requires knowledge of where to look for risk. So the question becomes more from a leadership point of view. How do you architect your teams to cover a sufficient amount of the design space to identify design elements to de-risk?
That's a great question, because we do that deliberately, because sometimes people will come to us something that while their product is not competitive with something we've done before, all the fundamentals are normal for us, and so therefore we can put together a team that's they're a little further down the road. And we can just make sure that there's nothing different or unusual about their particular case, and then move quickly through the gates and start executing to a launch. For others, they're saying, hey, could you manufacture this for us? We do manufacturing as well, but could you manufacture this for us? And we have to say, you know what, I'm not sure you're quite ready for that yet, because we have this concern. So our product, our business development process actually does a lot of that work. We're really trying to understand what our customers' need is today. Then subsequently, as the project gets kicked off, we have a very what we call a pre-kickoff meeting, where the product development, senior management, program management, and the functional managers for each of those groups all sit together and agree who is the appropriate team to put on the project at this stage, and then they will be put on. And we have, and it's sort of and so yeah, I think that kind of answers your question. There's another question behind that, which is how do you ensure that you have the skills that you need to address whatever's coming. And one of the you didn't say it, Kush, but one of the things that you've been where you and I have bonded is that you've introduced us to some very strong graduate candidates who we really like. And what do we really like in candidates is we really like a customer service focus, a commitment to completion and delivering on what was promised. But also we like a troubleshooting mindset. So here's the problem. Here are 20 potential solutions. Let me work on those, and then we can provide oversight and guidance to help someone like that pick the right approach first based on experience and move on that. Otherwise, we also have a process, the process I showed, which is we go and observe the users. We actually make the thing work on the bench, and then we go and we write down what the regulatory path to market is going to be. Those are the three biggies, and then capturing, doing an early rough order of magnitude cost analysis also is a key piece, just to let you know what else we need to be looking at.
Thank you for that answer. I agree that it takes a very curious and diverse skill set in order to work in an environment like Starfish Medical.
And after 20 years, and if most of our staff are Canadian, and so if you like to do what we like to do, we are the best place in Canada to do it. As we grow, there aren't that many other better places in North America to do what we do. So we do get a lot of interest from people who want to bring their design, product development expertise to bear in medical devices where the end result is you're helping other people.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm just being cognizant of time, and I see that we are at 2 p.m.
I did my best.
No problem at all. I struggle the same way as well. There's so much interesting things to talk about and to share. And so I think, for all of us at the Design Center, we're very, very appreciative of the chance to speak with you. I wanted to just to connect with Oscar here. Oscar, is there anything else that you wanted to add in terms of questions or anything else to discuss?
Actually, I do have a question for John. I was very appreciative of your development process. I think it was very, very well laid out. I do recognize the importance of having something that's formalized and taking a systematic approach to doing development, and, recognizing that stuff happens and you need to recover from the stuff that happens. But you used a term that I found very intriguing, John, when you were describing your process, and that is the requirement for people to behave appropriately. Depending on which part of the process they're in. Could you maybe elaborate on that concept of behaving appropriately?
Let me see if I can get back to this slide that, I didn't all tell you, by the way, the gross slide is over. Almost there. So here it is. So in phase 0, what we're doing at this point is we want to understand, we're exploring. So trying to finish things in this phase is not a good idea, because you get attached. We love to make, at this point, we love to make models out of cardboard, because you make it out of a cardboard and then you try and use it. And it doesn't work, or it could be better. You just carve a piece off, you stick another piece on, no one's attached to it. Even a SolidWorks model, by the time you've created a rough concept of something, people can get very attached to it and it's hard to change. And so keeping yourself open Technology as well. Just making it work all spread out on a bench is much, much better than trying to fit it into a nice looking box at this phase. Then we get into to the alpha phase. Here, the most important thing is don't kid yourself. Push yourself to deal with everything. If, you know, for us, we've accepted that, you know, it's not necessary. You know, injection molding is a thing that's a known thing that we can spend time and money on and finish. So we don't need to worry about that. We understand what the constraints will be, and so the designs that we do in 3D printing are compatible with injection molding. And if you don't know, if designers don't know what that is, they would need to consider that in this phase. But otherwise, we're building the finished product. We're trying to finish it, and in the way that, you know, it's sort of naively that beginner's mindset. Let's just get it finished, finish everything, get it working, all packed in one box so that it looks like and works like the final product. And as I say, the most important thing here is don't just listen to any little ringing bells. So hang on a minute, I haven't. This bit isn't quite yet finishing. Everything else is going so well, but this little bit isn't working. Make sure you focus your attention on the little bit that isn't working and you don't understand. If things are taking longer because of time and attention or feedback or whatever, then that's an understandable thing and worth managing, but that's, people normally manage that and focus on that quite well. It's the bit that the risk that you carried over from the initial phase that you haven't addressed is what you need to be looking out for. And then if you do your job right and that gate is good and you have a very well-defined list in beta, it's all about execution. But be aware if something on that list blows up and is a bigger issue than you thought it would be. In my experience, typically not. You're really, at this point, commitments have been made. You need to push this product through to completion. It's going to be as good as it is. We all agreed how good it's going to be. It's going to be that good. And we're ready to run our verification and validation and do those very formally and consideredly. And there's a bunch of rules around for medical devices about how to document them. Do a good job of that. In the transfer, it's really getting good processes that will sustain you well during the manufacturing, and making sure that both in the transfer and the early stage of manufacturing, oftentimes that's when the second you start receiving parts from a different batch than you had during all of your development cycle. And if you think that's going to be a risk, it's worth forcing it. But oftentimes you get a second batch from a different distribution, still within spec. Does it affect the performance of your device in some way? That's a thing to really look for and notice and expect during that time. And then during manufacturing, it's all about being responsive to the customer, but taking the lead from the business side about priorities and affordability. And then the other big thing through all of this that I would say to be aware of is new ideas. New ideas are great. Better ideas are awesome. Typically, if the business has decided to do this, those ideas, those better ideas, they should go in for the next step, for the phase, for the second release, version 2.0, and having a research group working on the research, which is before any of the phases that you see here, is perfect, is ideal for the future of the company. But don't let the research sidetrack the implementation of the product that's in front of us.
Great, thanks for that explanation.
Thank you, John. I think we're now officially 5 minutes over. So in the considering time, and want to make sure that all our participants, you know, some of them who are dialing in probably from overseas and maybe up quite late, wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to join us here and hear from Mr. John Walmsley speak about this interesting and important element of design from a practitioner's point of view. Like, real design of medical devices is not simple, and we appreciate you not only talking about the process, but also presenting examples of where they not only you had successes, but you've had challenges that you've had to overcome, because that's what we experience as pragmatic, practical designers. With that said, Oscar, maybe I'll hand it over to you to close.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you. John, thank you so much for taking the time out in your busy early morning on the West Coast to share with us your methodology, philosophy, and great case examples. And Kush, to you for hosting and inviting John in the first place. It's much appreciated. Finally, thank you to all the participants. Thanks for joining us. I'd just like to close with an invitation to all of you who are practicing or researching in design to share with us your experiences and your research so that we can continue this really important conversation on understanding our beautiful discipline of design. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us, and I wish you a great day and a happy weekend.
Oscar, thank you very much, and thank you to all the attendees as well.